Hi all, we're going to start shortly. My name is Moshe Appel and I'll give you a little more of an introduction soon. Welcome everyone as you're joining. Let's give people a few more minutes to join. So my name is Moshe Appel. As we're all waiting, take a moment and think about some things that are uncertain in your lives. And then we're going to talk more about it because that's the title of today's talk, which will be Living with Uncertainty. Okay, so we'll get started now. As I said, my name is Moshe Appel. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have a group practice called ADO Psychology Center. ADO stands for Anxiety, Depression, and OCD, which is what we specialize in. And I also post videos on these topics on our website, adopsychologycenter.com, so feel free to check that out as well. So the title for tonight's talk is Living with Uncertainty. And, in life in general, we have a lot of uncertainty, and today's times for sure. But I have a spoiler alert. If you're here to learn how to gain certainty in your life, which makes a lot of sense, right? We all want to feel certain. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the goal for tonight's talk, because it's impossible to gain certainty in a life which is inherently uncertain. But if you're here to learn how to live with uncertainty, then I'm hoping to give you a bunch of skills for learning how to deal with the lives that we live while experiencing uncertainty. So before I begin, I want to differentiate between psychopathological uncertainty and normative uncertainty. Normative uncertainty is what we could kind of expect to experience in life. Uncertainties that make sense. When it comes to psychopathological uncertainties, we're talking about uncertainty that comes up in a lot of different disorders, but it's a bit extreme. So let me give you some examples. In OCD, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? A great example is someone is going to bed at night and they lock their door, and when they go to bed, they ask themselves, wait, did I for sure lock the door? Is it possible that when I locked the door, maybe it didn't actually click all the way? I don't remember hearing the click. Let me go and check. And so they go and check and they, try locking the door again. And that helps a bit until they go back to bed and they ask themselves the same question again. Did I check the door? So as you can see, uncertainty is like a core underlying thinking pattern in OCD. But it's not just OCD. It actually comes up in a lot of different disorders. Another example is generalized anxiety disorder. In generalized anxiety disorder, people are worried and anxious about all different things throughout the day. They might be anxious about whether they're going to pass their test tomorrow, whether they're going to make their appointments on time, whether they're going to pay their bills on time, whether, their child or whoever got into a car accident, given that they're not home and they're supposed to be home. So as you can see, again, a lot of uncertainty coming up in generalized anxiety disorder. Another example is social anxiety disorder. The core fear in social anxiety disorder is fear of negative evaluation. And so again, someone's going into the gym and thinking about, is everyone looking at me? Do people think I don't know what I'm doing here? Or maybe someone goes into their workplace and they say good morning to their colleagues and they don't get a warm welcome back, and they ask themselves, did I do something wrong? Did I offend them? Are they not happy with me? And again, a lot of uncertainty about what other people are thinking of them. I'll just give you one last example from a disorder which is not anxiety-based, major depressive disorder. In clinical depression, there's a lot of hopelessness and a lot of questioning of whether I'm ever going to get out of this depression. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what my life, holds in store for me in the future. So as you can see, there's a lot of uncertainty in a bunch of different clinical disorders. But when you want to differentiate between this psychopathological uncertainty versus a more normative uncertainty, which I'll talk about more soon, the question you want to ask yourself is, does my uncertainty match the facts on the ground? Right? In OCD, for example, the example I gave, when someone locked the door, the facts say they locked the door, right? They know they locked the door. But if the person's still feeling uncertain, that means that their uncertainty is not matching the facts. Another question you can ask yourself is, other people in my situation, will they feel uncertain as well? And if the answer is yes, that may be more of a normative type of uncertainty. But if the answer is no, most people in your situation, most people, when their kid doesn't come home exactly when they're supposed to, especially if they have a history of not coming home when they're supposed to, they're not thinking maybe they got into a car accident. Or when most people lock the door at night, they're not checking a few times because they're uncertain whether it really truly locked. So that's another question you can ask yourself to differentiate between this more psychopathological uncertainty versus normative. So when it comes to the psychopathological type of uncertainty that we find across a bunch of different disorders, there are many different approaches you can use. There are ACT approaches, CBT approaches, DBT approaches, a lot of the exposure approaches, behavioral approaches. But what I find to be very helpful, a very concrete, simple approach, is to recognize that your mind, given whatever condition you have, is playing games with you. And it's trying to convince you of something that's not realistic. It's almost like you're watching a movie and you're seeing one actor shooting another actor, right? And you're not really scared. And if you are really scared, you just remind yourself, these are just two actors, right? And that makes you not be afraid anymore. And so if you can view your uncertainty through that lens, when you have a clinical disorder, you can say, my mind's playing games on me. There's this movie playing that feels so real, but it's not, it's fake. And therefore you disengage from that and refocus on your life. So that's a general quick trick of how to deal with uncertainty that's more psychopathological. Let's now shift to talking about a more normative type of uncertainty, where the uncertainty really matches the facts, right? You took a test and you only get the grade back in 2 weeks, and your grade is going to determine what law school you can apply to or what graduate school you can apply to or whether you get licensed or not. And there's uncertainty of how you did on the test, right? So your uncertainty is really matching the facts, right? Another example of uncertainty might be, you got a medical test done, you're not sure what the results are there. Or, with the war going on now, like what might the outcome be with that? All of these types of uncertainties are very normative and really match the facts on the ground. So I'm going to talk about 6 different approaches for how to deal with this more normative type of uncertainty. Again, it's not about gaining certainty, because that's impossible. It's about how to live with this uncertainty. The first approach I'm going to talk about is an ACT approach, acceptance and commitment therapy. And in this approach, ACT is a really great modality for almost anything you're experiencing, because it provides a framework within which to work through the challenge that you're experiencing. So in ACT, first, you identify your values, right? So what are your values? You might have religious values, you might have family values, you might have, doing good deeds as a value, being a good person. And then you ask yourself, based on these values, what are my goals? And so my goals are to engage in religious practice, to spend time with my family, to do good deeds, to spread kindness. And then you recognize that you have these goals in place, and you have these behaviors you want to be engaging in to meet your goals. But we have thoughts and emotions that often come up and derail us from this vision of a life that we want to live. And so the ACT approach says, recognize your values, recognize your goals, recognize your actual life that you want to live. And when any thoughts or emotions come up, including thoughts of uncertainty, that are trying to derail you from living the life that you actually want to live, you ask yourself one question: is this thought helpful or hurtful to my cause? And if this thought is helpful to your cause, great. Think about it, dwell on it, try to solve it. But if the thought is not helpful, another term that we use in ACT is workability. Is this thought workable? Is it helpful? Is it? And the way we define workability is this thought going to help me engage more in behaviors that are in line with my goals and values or not? And so if it is, then you want to deal with the thought. If not, you want to disengage. And when I say disengage, in ACT, there are many different what's called cognitive diffusion techniques to help you disengage from your thoughts. But the trick here is recognizing that you can't control what thoughts enter your mind, but you could control how you respond to your thoughts. So a thought entering your mind, the thought might be, oh my God, did I pass that test? That's a really important test. That you couldn't control. But right now you could control how do you respond. Do you take a few minutes or hours and start thinking and ruminating and calculating and Googling what other people get and really spending time on it? Or do you respond by saying, okay, great thought, not helpful for me right now, getting back to my life? So this is the first approach. It's recognizing your goals and your values, using those as the flag posts, to lead your life, and not engaging with thoughts or emotions that come up that are trying to derail you from living your actual value-driven life. The second approach relates to the power of imagination. Okay, and like most things in life, things can be used for the good and for the bad, positive and negative. So our imagination power is so strong, and I'll just give you a quick example, right? If let's say someone asks you, are you worried about the fact that your kid might have gotten into a car accident in the last 10 minutes? And you tell them, what are you talking about? My kid's right next door, in the other room. They were just doing their homework there. They're fine. But what if someone told you, are you concerned about your kid getting into a car accident? And imagine first, and then you start imagining what that would mean, right? So you picture the cars, colliding. You picture smoke and screaming and, sirens going on. And I don't want to get too graphic here, but you can imagine what other graphic images can come to your mind. Most likely what you're going to want to do is get up, go to the other room, make sure your kid's there, maybe even give them a hug, and then get back. And so what you want to recognize is that when you are giving into the power of imagination, it's taking you down a whole rabbit hole that is unrealistic but feels real. So if someone asked you about your kid, you'd have no problem saying they're right next door doing their homework. But once you start imagining what could have happened, then you start really believing it. And then it's hard to get out of that loop until you regain that certainty. And because of this, you want to, what this approach says is catch yourself early on in the rumination or imagination process and stop yourself early on in the process. So instead of imagining whatever it is you're worried about, you want to not imagine it, or even imagine it for the positive. Just picture okay, I'm going to picture myself doing well on the test and being happy and moving on. And in 2 weeks, you'll find out one way or another. And if you did great, you just save yourself 2 weeks of agonizing. And if you did poorly, then you'll have to retake a test or whatever you'll have to do regardless. This power of imagery comes up also in sports psychology, where one of the techniques is having athletes imagine themselves doing well on the court, shooting the ball, hitting the ball, hitting a basket, and it can be very powerful there too. So that's the second approach, the power of imagination. The third approach is one that we use a lot with generalized anxiety disorder, where, like I mentioned before, so people are worrying all day long about all different topics. And in generalized anxiety disorder, this technique is called setting aside worry time. So purposely setting aside 20 minutes a day, let's say, to engage in all your concerns and all your worries. What you accomplish by doing this is not really getting rid of the worrying, but it's about isolating it to a small period of time later in the day, so that throughout the day, whenever you have worries or concerns coming up, you tell yourself, okay, I'll think about this during my worry time later in the day. And this can help someone get back into their lives for most of the day, where until now their whole day was hijacked by these worries, and have it secluded to a very specific short period of time. It's also helpful because usually in the moment of a trigger, in the moment of an intrusive thought or a worry thought, it feels so real, it feels so urgent. There's this full sense of urgency. I got to respond to it, I got to think about it. But if that same thought you intentionally bring up later in the day, you might be okay, whatever, it's not bothering me as much, even though no facts changed. Again, because many times these thoughts don't have so much basis in reality. And so in the moment of the trigger, there's this quick very powerful emotional response, maybe even a physiological response. And so it's hard to disengage from it. But setting aside worry time, number one, secludes it to later, a smaller period of time later in the day. And number two, it's not in the moment of the trigger anymore, which might make it less bothersome to you. So that's the third approach, all right? We said 6, we got 3 more to go. Hang in there with me. The fourth approach is, it's a very CBT approach, which is challenge your thoughts, right? And don't jump to conclusions. And this is similar to what I said before about imagination, but this is more thought-based, and before we spoke more imagery-based. when it comes to a CBT approach, when you have the thought, like, did my kid get into the car accident, for example, right? Or let's take a much more normative uncertainty type, which I took this test. It's a very challenging test. About 50% of people pass. I don't know if I passed, right? Now, your initial thought, the scary thought might be, oh my God, I probably didn't pass. And if I didn't pass, I'm going to have to retake the test. I'm going to miss deadlines, whatever the consequences are of that. But from a CBT perspective, you can challenge the thought and ask yourself, do I really think I didn't pass? Do I have any evidence that I really didn't pass? Do I have any evidence to the opposite, maybe, to the reverse, right? Like I took 10 practice tests and all of them, I got close to passing, or I did pass, or I did even better than just a passing grade. So challenge, and therefore this test I just took, even though I'm worried I didn't pass, but the evidence says that I likely did pass. So challenging your thoughts and not jumping to conclusions is another important thing when you're dealing with tolerating uncertainty. The fifth approach is to learn how to become process-oriented versus outcome-oriented. And this is a very good approach when it comes to uncertainties about the future that you still need to take some action towards, right? So some of the examples I gave was, for example, like if you took the test already and you're worried about how you did in the past, how to deal with that uncertainty, right? Because you're not getting a grade for 2 weeks, but there's nothing else for you to do, no other action necessary to be taken on your part. On the other hand, what if, a very similar example, you're currently studying for a test and you're very worried that you might not do well on the test when you take it in a month from now. So here you're dealing with uncertainty about the future, while you still need to be taking some actions towards doing well on the test. And so when it comes to this kind of uncertainty, the skill I'm talking about now is being process-oriented versus outcome-oriented. What I mean by this is asking yourself, what behavior do I need to engage in to likely do well on the test? And you might say, okay, I need to study 1 hour per day, 2 hours per day, whatever it might be. But every time you're about to study, you're likely to get this pit in your stomach, like, oh my God, I hope I do well on this test. I don't know how I'm going to do. And all of those thoughts, again, are taking you away from being able to calmly study for the test. So what you want to tell yourself is, I'm not going to be thinking about outcome-oriented. Right now, I'm not thinking about what score I'm going to get. I'm just thinking about the process. What process do I need to engage in? What behaviors do I need to engage in to likely get the best result? And that's where all my focus is going to be. So instead of focusing on outcome, which is anyways out of your control, the exact mark you're going to get, what's in your control is the behavior you engage in. Focus on process, on behavior versus outcome. And the last skill, which is number 6, is taking more of a religious approach. Assuming you have religious beliefs of God being in control, Hashem being in control, whatever he does is for the best, even if we don't understand it. If you take that kind of belief, then it's very similar to like when you go on an airplane, right? And unless you have a phobia related to flying, you likely are not very nervous that the plane's going to crash or that, there's going to be some kind of issue. You're not engaging in any behavior on the plane to make sure the plane doesn't crash because you recognize it's all out of your control anyways. It's up to the pilot. And you kind of put your trust in the pilot and trust that the pilot will take you where you need to go. And similarly, from a religious perspective, you can have this belief that, God ultimately is in control of what the outcome's going to be, right? And Hashem's going to do whatever is best, even if we don't fully understand it. And again, therefore, it takes off all the concern about the future because number one, it's not in your control anyway, so there's nothing you can do one way or another. Number two, even if you end up failing the test, if you believe that might be for your best, it also becomes much less concerning. And there are so many examples of how it could end up being for your best, right? Like maybe you were going to go to a certain school with a certain score and you would have had to drop out of that school, or you would fail out of that school. It would be too challenging, or you'll have other obstacles there. And so it causes you to go to a different school, which ends up being better for you. We can always, there are always a lot of stories about how things end up turning out for the best. But this is another approach for those of you that have religious beliefs that, Hashem's in control, Hashem does what's best. So it's really about dropping that need for that certainty, having faith that whatever happens is for the best, and then once again focusing on the process. So it's very similar to the previous skill I just mentioned of focusing a lot on the process instead of focusing on the outcome. So there you go. Just to summarize, we spoke a lot about living with uncertainty, not gaining certainty, because that's inherently impossible. We differentiated between psychopathological uncertainty versus a more normative uncertainty. We spoke about how uncertainty comes up in a lot of different disorders, such as OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, even a major depressive disorder and clinical depression. We spoke about how there are many approaches of dealing with that type of uncertainty, but the one that I mentioned today was recognizing that your mind is playing games with you, treating it as a movie that seems really real, but it's fake, and instead refocusing on your actual life. Then we shift over to a more normative type of uncertainty, which we said you can define by whether the uncertainty matches the facts. In that case, it's normative. If it doesn't match the facts, it might be, more psychopathological. We said you can also ask yourself, if someone else was experiencing what I'm experiencing now, would they be uncertain? And that can also help you differentiate between normative versus more psychopathological. And for this more normative type of uncertainty, we spoke about 6 different approaches. For dealing with it, we spoke about an ACT approach, acceptance and commitment therapy, and not ruminating and engaging in your goals and your values. We spoke about the power of imagination and how things that really are not real, but if you imagine them, they could start feeling real. So not going down that rabbit hole and instead thinking more positively. We spoke about scheduling worry time and maybe also keeping a worry log, which I didn't mention, but if you keep a log of all your worries every time it comes up, and then you write what actually happened, next time the same worry comes up, the next time your kid doesn't come home on time, you can look at the book and be like, okay, for the past 10 times the kid didn't come home, every time I thought something terrible happened, nothing happened. So that could help reassure you a bit. We spoke about challenging your thoughts and not jumping to conclusions. We spoke about focusing on the process versus the outcome and how that relates to, religious beliefs as well. So thank you all for joining. I'll let you know if you can put some questions in the chat if you're interested. I got 2 questions before this live, which I'll address now. First question was, how do I know, I feel uncertain, I feel anxious, how do I know when I need to get help? And the answer is almost every disorder in the DSM, in the book with the clinical disorders and with the criteria you need to meet for each one, there's one criteria that's present in almost every disorder. And that criteria says, do these symptoms cause clinical levels of distress or functional impairment? And so that's your answer. If what you're experiencing is causing you a lot of distress, or it's impairing in your functioning, in your in your job, with your family, with your friends, that's usually when I say to, seek a professional help. And the other question was, how to deal with uncertainty related to the crisis going on now in Israel. And for that, I would say it's a little bit beyond the scope. Some of the techniques we spoke about today can help for that too. But I also put out a video on my website specifically dealing with managing anxiety during a crisis. And you can check that video out if you're interested. I'm going to look here. It seems like there may be one question coming up. Was this recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. And it's going to be posted to this Instagram profile, so you can watch it later as well. Thank you all for joining. If you'd like to contact, I plan on doing another live in 2 weeks or so, and maybe another one after that. If you'd like to contact me or watch any of the other videos that I posted on all different topics related to OCD, anxiety, and depression, you can check out my website, which is adopsychologycenter.com. Stands for Anxiety, Depression, OCD. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.